This is Maureen Elward. You're listening to BackCAST Cape Ann. The stories you hear as part of BackCAST Cape Ann's series on the LBGTQ community highlights their contribution, care, and activism. It's a look back at experiences, significant moments, and persistent memories. For this episode in our series on the LBGTQ community, I speak with the Reverend Wendy Fitting, Minister Emeritus of the Unitarian Universalist Church of Gloucester. She retired in 2013, having spent 24 years as pastor at the church. Wendy graduated from Harvard Divinity School in 1989. She's a Gloucester resident.
I graduated from a private girls' school in 1967, and I was desperate to be in New York City. I went to New York University, Washington Square College, and for, I think, my entire life, I had been, I don't want to say attracted, because it wasn't a sexual attraction for me, but I'd been drawn to women, and usually, teachers, mentors, people I respected, but really drawn to them. I also had boyfriends. When I went to NYU, I had a couple of boyfriends, but I was very much attached to my roommate in college. And I had no language for, I began to feel that there was something wrong with me, but I had no language for it. I can't ever remember hearing, the word gay or lesbian. It's interesting thinking about that now because, it's part of who we are, our culture. It's not a hidden word. So I went through some pretty rocky places. I moved to Boston with my boyfriend. Luckily, my school chum from NYU, Nancy Gardella, said to me, "You gotta read Jill Johnston's column in the Village Voice." And of course, the Village Voice was something I read when I was in New York. And luckily, I was living in Brighton. Down on the corner was a shop that sold it. So every week, I went and read Jill Johnston, and that was it, because she had been a dance critic, but she came out and was writing what you probably call now a blog about being gay. And that was it. I was probably at the time 23 years old. And so I still had a boyfriend. I broke up with him. I went to the Cambridge Women's Center and got connected with gay women, lesbians, whatever you want to call them. That was amazing.
Tell me a little bit about how you made your way to Cape Ann.
Well, before I came to Cape Ann, I was connected with the Cambridge Women's Center, and really got very involved in the lesbian community, the lesbian feminist community, and I want to say something about that because, it was very constricting. I mean, it was the age of political correctness. And, I jumped into that world.
What time frame are we talking about?
This is like the 70s, very early 70s, 71, 72 maybe. I characterize it by this image of we were all on the same bus, all these lesbians, and we all had to have the same haircuts and the same clothes, and we all had sort of freedom names. And there was a lot of pressure to say the right thing and not say the wrong thing, and it just rubbed against my sense of, I'm an individual. I did that for a number of years. I listened to a lot of bad lesbian music and pretended to like it. I went to
what is bad lesbian music?
Well, I don't want to name. It was all like, any woman can be a lesbian. Every woman basically is a lesbian. It was like Lesbian Nation. And so the political agenda in the lyrics kind of ruined the music. And I pretended to like this stuff because I wanted to fit in, but eventually, I just kind of broke out of there. And when I came out, I was working for a private detective agency in Boston and meeting all kinds of amazing people. A pretty edgy job, but I was feeling like busting out of whatever Girl Scout camp, whether it was the Hartridge School for Girls or the bus of the lesbian feminists. I mean, a tremendous source of being free and really finding out who I was. I mean, it was very liberating. So I didn't want to be contained. So part of this, being sort of, released to be out on my own journey, I had always wanted to be a Unitarian Universalist minister from the time I was a junior in high school. I was madly in love with Ralph Waldo Emerson. I was very committed to this idea. I mean, it just felt right. One of the most liberating experiences that I had that really put me back on the path toward ministry was working at the Fernald State School in Waltham, which is the oldest institution in the Western Hemisphere for people labeled mentally retarded. And I went there to kind of redeem myself from the detective agency, which was pretty edgy. So 6 years I worked at Fernald as a ward attendant. And I learned more about humanity at Fernald than I'd ever learned, out in the world. I worked with people who needed to be toilet trained, learn to brush their teeth. We were trying to prepare them for group homes out in the community. They were labeled severe and profound, whatever that means. It was right at the time when there was a consent decree in Massachusetts to improve the institutions and improve possibilities for people to live outside of them. So the doors were taken off the seclusion rooms. I mean, there was some pretty primitive stuff that was still going on when I started working there. I had dropped out of NYU, so to move on in my job in the Department of Mental Health, I got a degree from the Antioch program in Cambridge. And then I worked at the central office, and then I worked at the Lindemann Center, and it had been 12 years altogether. And I really wanted to get out of that field. I moved to Cape Ann, wanted to get out of the city, and actually hadn't realized that I had ancestors buried there. My great-grandmother and her brother came from Sweden, lived in Pigeon Cove, and we'd visited once in a while, but I knew that I really always loved Cape Ann.
So you lived in Rockport when you moved up here.
Yeah.
And was there a gay community here back in the 70s?
Yeah, there was. I mean, it's I think for the most part, I think this is still true. It's been people who are coupled. So I had to go away someplace, and I had a cat, and my upstairs neighbor recommended this woman, Jill, who took care of animals. And so when I got back, Jill had sort of perused my book collection and my records that probably had some of those old bad lesbian. Anyway, so when I got back, she very tentatively said, I'm going to give you the gay discount. And I was like, oh, great. And so I got to know her and her partner, and they were great friends. And then another couple of women who were in Gloucester, and a few others, but not many. Not many, but it happened almost initially that I connected with people who were gay, women mostly, and so that made living up here even more convinced. I didn't need a lot of convincing because I really wanted to be here, and I was still working, and I commuted, and then I quit. I applied to Divinity. I thought, this is the time. I got in and didn't have money, but it was the kind of opportunity that very few people have to realize their dream of what they want. I was attracted to parish ministry, but the thing that I knew best was that I wanted to be on Cape Ann. So when I was finished, just about finished with my degree, I was asked to check out this job at the Gloucester Church. And the Gloucester Church was, I didn't even know it existed. I knew the one in Rockport, but it was on its way out. I mean, it was moribund. There was a no trespassing sign on the front of that unbelievably beautiful building that said, "No trespassing, police take notice." So they were really on the edge of maybe even closing. So I applied for a job that was partially funded by the Unitarian Universalist Association, specifically to help, a dying church, to revive a dying church. And, a friend of mine said, even if you called this fiction, you wouldn't believe it. Because here I was doing the thing that I really love to do, living in the place that I loved, and finding a job basically right next door. So, there was no question in my mind that if I got hired, I would do it, which I did. Now, the woman who was the representative of the Unitarian Universalist Association met with the board at the Gloucester Church, most of whom were, people who'd been there, who grew up there, whose parents grew up there, and were elderly. And she didn't ask me, and I would have told her not to do this, but she kind of outed me. She told them that I was gay. And they had met me briefly, but it threw them for a loop. I mean, they took a while to catch their breath. And I kind of waited for them to do that because this goes back to the bus, right? It's not an in-your-face issue for me. I'm a lot of things. We all are. Especially with folks who aren't used to out gay people, being out, right? I wanted them to know me as a person and not have that label kind of affix itself to me and, kind of obscure everything else that I was, my eye color, my height, my philosophy, my humor, everything that you are. There are tons of things that we are. But for people who aren't familiar and maybe scared, all they would see was, she's a dyke. So I didn't get mad. I wasn't mad at all. I thought it was a bonehead move on the part of this woman from the UUA, who's actually a friend, but they wound up hiring me. I knew that the way that we were going to save the church and bring people in was that first we had to establish trust. I recognized that this was their sacred place. So I didn't come in with an agenda to change everything and make it, friendly to young people, or just we needed to build trust.
So this was a Cape Ann first. You were a woman.
And short.
And,
and gay.
You're a woman, you're short, and you're gay. And this was this is a significant moment for Cape Ann and a church on Cape Ann, especially a church with such an incredible history of firsts. And they go ahead and they hire you.
Yeah, it really was a leap of faith. If I had gone after them with a complaint or, some sort of homophobic blah, blah, it would never have worked. It wouldn't have worked. And that's just not my wiring. So, yes, it's all about building trust in relationships and, acknowledging that original group of people, mostly women, very powerful women, had devoted, tremendous time and love and energy into that church. And I appreciated that tremendously. And I guess there's a certain amount of courage that, I'll say, that goes into this. I, didn't feel afraid. I didn't feel afraid that, I didn't know they were going to, because I was gay, they were going to egg my house or something, but not at all. Not at all. I knew who I was. I knew that if I let them get to know me, which I did, that we would be okay. We'd be okay. And we were.
So you took the church forward in so many different ways, and I would love for you to tell the story about a marriage, a special marriage that happened in 1994.
One of the things that over a period of time and with a lot of basis in trust we did at the church was we started an AIDS support group. And I had gotten involved even before I started at the church. They had hired me, but I hadn't actually started the Cape Ann AIDS Health Project was going. And I knew the people who were starting it and was involved in that. And through that, I met Peter Stickle. Peter Stickle is a violinist. He lives in Wakefield now. And I met a lot of great people and a lot of gay people, mostly gay men. But that was an extension then of the gay community. The people who, and the church, we had established enough rapport and trust that, one night a week there was an AIDS support group at the church. It was people who were living with HIV and their spouses or loved ones all together, mostly people who were IV drug users. And I think that was a first on Cape Ann, that support group. And we were very careful about people's privacy. But anyway, I met Peter, and then he got together with John Bumstead. Great love story. John Bumstead is a cellist, and they started the New England String Ensemble. And they fell in love, and they came and said, we want to get married. And I said, great. I knew it would happen. I just knew. I knew that there was work to be done on that, or some hand-holding, or questions answered. So we met, and we planned, and they said, they said a date like June that didn't work in that year's calendar. And they said, oh, no, we're planning this for a year. It's a year from June, because they wanted to involve their families, and they knew it would take time. They said, we're going to invite everybody from the church to come, and, stuff like that. So I figured out, some sort of good political tools, and there's nothing wrong with them. I knew that I had to get the support of the pillar of the church, who was also at the time the chair of the board, and this is Mrs. Toomey, who was the head of the Women's Guild. She was very powerful, the most powerful person in the church. And so I went to her house, and I used to visit people at home. I mean, that was part of the thing, the culture, which was great. So I went to her house, and I said, I would like to have your support for this. I'm not going to ask permission, because I wouldn't do that with a straight couple. But I'd like the board's support, because this is this is different. And she said, who else knows about this? And I said, I'm coming to you first. She said, all right. I told her about John and Peter. So she said, okay. And at the board meeting, she said, Wendy wants to ask us for her support on this issue. And I explained it to the board. And, there was a little pale, a little silence. And, I just want to say it was Becky Parnell. Both of these women are of blessed memory. Becky Parnell, who'd been a Universalist forever, said it would be against our principles to not support this. The wedding was great, but I think that behind the scenes stuff that happens, that process was remarkable and wonderful. Remarkable in the sense of it ought to be remarked on. Mm-hmm. And then toward the end of that year, some of the women were getting nervous. So we met again, a number of the women who in the church, at Virginia Toomey's house, and I said, you can ask me anything. and I meant it. Because I knew the perceptions about gay people were so sexualized that was a barrier. I mean, it's unfortunate, but it kind of still is in a way, and that's a problem. And Doris McPhee, also of blessed memory, said, well, why can't they just be friends? And I said, Doris, they are friends. They're really, really close friends. And I think meeting with the people, saying, yes, you can ask me any question. I'm not going to report you to the gay police. And so a number of the women came to the wedding, and, they had all kinds of preconceptions about gay weddings, that weren't, and this was their sacred room. That's the other thing. Jenny said to me, why can't you marry them in your office? And I said, well, I'm there every Sunday. She said, well, that's different. So it was in the sanctuary, their sacred room. And it was gorgeous. It was, very formal wedding. They had the flautist from the BSO was doing the music, was fantastic. And luckily, they had done a Christmas concert the winter before. And, everybody came, all the people, the community, and all of the people from the church came, and they knew who this was. Peter and John, it was their orchestra. And so when John spoke at the wedding, he said, this is a very important church to me. We did a concert here, and everyone was welcoming. I mean, it was a love fest. And the women in the pews loved this wedding, went to this wonderful reception. Everybody was welcome. And they were proud of what they had done. And I was. About a week later, there was a fire in the church. It was set in one of the wells by one of the outside windows, the windows to the vestry, to the basement. And it didn't amount to anything, thank God. Thank you, Gloucester Fire Department. And then a few days later, I was on the lawn of the church, and a car drove by on Church Street, and somebody yelled, "Next time we'll burn it down." So I would say that there was somewhat of an intimidation attempt. I didn't report it to the police or anything. I had a very strong feeling that this was, I love Gloucester. Gloucester is full of all kinds of different kinds of people. When I first moved here, there were people who were sort of our eccentrics. There was the catnip man, and there were, all these great people. It's changing.
We still have those eccentrics.
Yeah, I'm glad. Yeah, we gotta.
I don't think we'll ever change.
It is.
We'll never change.
It's a welcoming community in a very different way than the gay community in the city. The bus.
And what's the difference that you see?
I would say that it's much more integrated. The separate thing I get because, people were in danger. When I was at NYU, I lived in the West Village, and I was coming home from school. It was dark. It was night. I walked right through the Stonewall, 2 nights of the Stonewall riots, demonstrations. It was dangerous, to be out and gay. Very dangerous. It still is, I think, in places. So you tend to retreat with your own people. That makes sense for safety and, just for relationships and support and all that kind of stuff, and to celebrate your culture. People on Cape Ann tend to have come to settle, and because, especially Gloucester, I don't want to diss Rockport, but especially Gloucester, is a community where you can have a place, even if you're the catnip man. So there's much less of a stigma. And the people who come, the gay people who live here, they're not in this sort of mode of in your face, I'm gay, do you have a problem with that? It's not a sexualized thing, which is great because that can be a barrier. Not every community and not just any community, would be a place where you could just be a neighbor who's gay, who's married or partnered, and your neighbors invite you over for supper, and you invite them over for supper. It's a context that I think most people take for granted that gay people haven't had. If you were in a relationship and you were gay, you didn't have the kind of familial surrounding support that a lot of us would take for granted, so that if you're having a problem, right, you're in this sort of isolated partnership, you can't, just go over and sit down and talk to your mom, or your neighbor. In Gloucester, there was much more of a possibility and realized possibility of that kind of integration. So it's a two-way. It's Gloucester, and it's gay people who don't want to be isolated, who want to be in a real place with a root system.
What are you seeing today? As you experience this, gay equality, gay marriage is legal, and certainly there's a much more open society. Young people seem to be moving that straight forward, and that is fantastic to see. What are some of your feelings as the gay community comes into its own, it seems? Is that the right thing to say?
Yeah, I think so. I think we have been. I think if you find a context like Gloucester, what we need as people in relationships with our broader community, the kind of support that you would get from family, from friends, you can't have a good relationship in a vacuum. Gloucester has provided those contexts. My basic feeling about this exploration with gender identity and transgender and all that is it's akin to what we know about the universe, that it's expanding. And that's the way, I always approach the church, that we open the doors wider and wider, because that's, and it takes some courage, but that's what the universe is doing, so we better get with the program. I had a great friend who was a member of the church, and he's gone to God now too, but, he was a transsexual transvestite, and I have photographs of Kevin at the Old Timers Bar on like St. Patrick's Day, sitting on some guy's lap, and you would never know that this adorable, beautiful woman, Kevin was slight, was a guy. He's sitting on this guy's lap, and it's like these things are possible. He took risks. He was kind of on the vanguard, he died peacefully, thank God. He didn't get murdered or anything, but which used to happen. But it's expanding, and now there are people who have family members who have gone through gender reassignment process here in Cape Ann.
What is something that you'd like to say to young people today who are finding their way, just like you did when you were 23?
Well, I think the first thing that I would say is be careful, but trust. Be brave. If possible, don't isolate yourselves in gay or whatever enclave. Make sure to build yourself a really trustworthy support system so that you can, when you need to, take a step back to a safe place. I think the most important thing is your happiness. Be who you are. To me, happiness has the greatest value. And it's not the kind of happiness that you get from getting a new car. It's the happiness that you get from wonderful things that happen by surprise, usually in relationship, when, your mom and dad says, I get it. Whether it's transgender or gay or bi or, whatever, there's a whole alphabet now of ways that we can be. The thing that I would say most is make it about love and not sex. We had to get in people's faces, about sex, which is, and it freaked them out. I think it's an affectional orientation, whatever it is. First of all, it's true to yourself. But we have tended to alienate people with our, with getting in their faces, as angry and enraged as we legitimately were and can be. That's not, I don't think that's makes us happy. I don't think that builds relationships. So there needs to be safe places for your anger, your joy. But your happiness is expanding. I mean, it's part of the larger world.
It really is all about love, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah, it is.
And that's how people change.
Well, Wendy Fitting, thank you so much for
You're
being
welcome.
on the podcast. It's been a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
BackCAST Cape Ann is a production of 1623 Studios. This show was produced by me, Maureen Aylward, with technical assistance from Becky Tober. Find BackCAST Cape Ann on 1623 Studios, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can find all our podcast episodes on 1623studios.org.